Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Human Factors Cast. This is episode 304. We're recording this live on October 17th, 2024. I'm your host, Nick Roome, and I'm joined today by Meghan Michaels, who is a new face to the show. Welcome to the show, Meghan.
Well, thank you very much. It's nice to be here.
Such a pleasure to have you. We have an awesome show for you lined up today. We're going to be talking about the FTC's new click-to-cancel mandate rule. I don't know what to call it, but we're going to be talking about that. There's also some updated pedestrian safety rules that are sort of aimed at the massive SUVs and pickup trucks you see on American streets. We're going to be taking a look into some accessibility within Hilton, partnering with Be My Eyes. And lastly, we'll kind of touch on the SpaceX catching the super heavy booster after Starship's fifth flight. But first, we have some programming notes for y'all. Usually this is the part of the show where Barry would come through and talk through some of the stuff over at 1202. But since he's not here, I'm going to plug another podcast for you. If you haven't been keeping up to date with Safe and Effective, Heidi just put out a latest episode, and you might know the guest on there. It's me. I'm the guest. And what we talked about is sort of integrating some agile methodologies into research and research operations and how you do all that, and talk about agile, Scrum, a bunch of boring stuff if you're not into it, but super nerdy if you're into it like me. So it's episode 10. It's out now across both Safe and Effective and Human Factors Cast feeds. I did kind of simul launch them for you, so you can get to it on either platform. With all that being said, I think it's time that we dig into some Human Factors news. That's right. This is the part of the show all about Human Factors news. You're not Barry. Meghan, what is the news story this week? What's up first?
No, I am not Barry. First up, we have FTC Click to cancel. So this week, the FTC has put in a new rule that requires companies to have a click to cancel option. So this comes from customer complaints about the complex cancellation process that have been on the rise all over the place. We've all experienced it, justifying this regulatory action. So huge deal, huge win for customers. The FTC has been actively targeting these practices across multiple industries, including streaming services and subscription boxes. Let's see. What else do we have about this? Small, seemingly trivial user interface decisions like hiding a cancel button can have massive impacts on customer trust. They acknowledge the frustration of users with dark patterns, which is a design techniques used to trick our users into staying subscribed. I have a lot of thoughts on this, Nick.
Yeah. Do you?
A lot. Yeah. Yeah, a lot. I'm happy to share, but I definitely want to hear what you have to say about this as well.
So I have some strong language in here directed at Spectrum. And this is, I'm happy for this because you're right. This is very needed, and I'm glad when government regulation steps in and says, hey, you need to make things easier for people, because that means that you need more people like us to come in and say, how do you make that easier for people? And click to cancel is it's slogany, and I really like the fact that it's slogany. So let me tell you a little bit about my experience with Spectrum, and then I'll kind of get your initial thoughts here. But with Spectrum, they are sort of infamous for having this long, convoluted process for canceling your service. And when I needed to cancel my internet service with them, I didn't want to deal with the, hey, are you sure we're going to upgrade, we're going to lower the price for you and do all this stuff. So instead, the workaround that I did was I'm moving out to the middle of nowhere. I didn't move, but you look for a random house on Google Maps that is not within their coverage. And you say, I'm moving here. And I go, oh, sorry. Okay. We'll cancel your service. When are you leaving? Tomorrow. So that's what I had to do to get out of that internet service, where I think if this sort of regulation was in place, then that's not something that I would have had to do. I would have just been able to literally click to cancel. But I'm curious on your thoughts. So you said you have a lot to say. What do you have to say?
Okay, so I find this super interesting because I am at this stage in my life right now. I have two teenagers, but I also have parents that are in their 70s. So I've got this interesting juxtaposition of also I'm right in the center and I work in tech. So I'm fairly techie. Like I am a person who likes to try and figure things out. A basic obstacle for me is not a typical obstacle. I just kind of keep trying until I get it. That is not how my kids' generation or how my parents' generation works, especially as it comes to technology. And so the things that I see happening for both of them is this piling up of things that they have subscribed to, whether it's something they've paid for or not. And that is where the frustration builds up. So even literally 2 weeks ago, I sat on the couch with my daughter who she just turned 18, in the process of preparing for that changeover to adulthood. One of the things that we've been looking at are like, what are the types of things to do to begin building a credit history for her? So we did our research. We found a card that's perfect for young students that are getting ready to kind of join into the world. We go through the process of creating the account. And this particular one is great because it's the kind of card where it's a secured card. So like you're responsible for the balance in it. You're not lending from, a company. Well, you have to pay a monthly fee to maintain this. So it takes your information to your bank and you create the account. And then after it does that, it says put in your birthday.
Hmm.
Nowhere until that point, and only in the fine print does it say you can create an account 18 years and older only. She
Hmm.
was 17 when she was trying to do this. And guess what? There's no way to cancel it. So for the last 3 months, she
She's been
has
paying a
received
fee.
a charge on her bank account for a card that she doesn't have and that she cannot create, and we have no way of canceling it.
That's
That's
ridiculous.
infuriating, and, that's totally taking advantage of a young kid who's trying to go through, normal adulting, learning life steps. Those are that super sucked for her. Um, so there was that, and then on the other side, I have my parents who, just this week, I mean, issues with my dad and Facebook and someone hacking his account, and he's all up in arms, and literally it's, I just want to cancel it. How do I just cancel it? How do I get my,
Yeah.
and he cannot. It's that kind of stuff. It's so it's hard to watch people that you care about be frustrated over something that shouldn't be challenging. And I think that is what is so powerful about what the FTC is doing in this whole process, is that they have recognized the critical component of trust
Yeah.
in all of this. It's not just about having a really easy point of access. That's a huge bonus, but they have zoned in on the importance of people's inherent need to be heard, and know that when they are joining a company of some sort in some way, that there is value to that, and if they want to leave, they can leave. There's trust in being able to leave just as much as there is trust being able to join, right? So
Yeah. Let's
I
well, let's talk a little bit about that because they call this negative option marketing programs. And basically what that boils down to is dark patterns of trying to hide
Mhm.
a way to cancel a service. And I'm just going to read off some stats here. The number of complaints steadily increased over the last 5 years. And in 2024, the Federal Trade Commission received nearly 70 consumer complaints a day on average, up from 42 per day in 2021. So we've seen an increase, and they cite that this is largely convenient for sellers, but not so much for the consumers. And so the final rule, they say, will have some framework prohibiting the sellers in this instance from. So here are the four quotes: misrepresenting any material fact made while marketing goods or service with a negative option feature,
Okay.
failing to clearly and conspicuously disclose material terms prior to obtaining a consumer's billing information in connection with a negative option feature. So there you go. That would have protected your child there in that case. You
Mhm.
have failing to obtain a consumer's express informed consent to the negative option feature before charging the customer or consumer, and lastly, failing to provide a simple mechanism to cancel the negative option feature and immediately halt charges. So I mean, we call this click to cancel, but really this is looking at more than click to cancel. And so thank you for
Mhm.
bringing up, some of the other stuff around it. I think, yeah, I'm excited for this. I really love that, that this is happening. And one thing that I think surprised Frank and I when we were at HFES is that HFES lobbies a lot. They spend a lot of money on lobbying for human factors in government, and I wonder if they had anything to do with this. That's all I'll say. The lobbying firm.
Yeah, that would be incredible to know. I mean, yeah, I was surprised at the visceral reaction that I had to reading this. Like, it's kind of like it's about time, but it again, it goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, sometimes you don't need what you need until it's there, and it's kind of like this is that. Like, nobody really knew that this was something that needed to be asked for because it's kind of an assumed thing, right? Like, I want to leave. How do I leave? Oh, I can't figure out how to
You have
leave.
to call. You have to call.
Yeah.
Uh,
It's
all
nuts, or
right.
you have to send a message by carrier pigeon or and hop on one foot and sprinkle confetti behind you standing backwards.
I
I
know,
don't
right?
know.
And post a video online and call it all that. All right. Why don't we go ahead and get into the next story? What do you got for us?
Okay, next story. The US seeks new pedestrian safety rules aimed at increasingly massive SUVs and pickup trucks. So, SUVs and trucks account for nearly 79% of new vehicle sales in the US. That's a lot. Hood heights of pickups have risen significantly, with the 2017 Ford F 250's hood as tall as some car roofs. Now, I'm a pretty tall person, and that is tall. That's real tall. The proposed rule aims to minimize pedestrian head injuries by addressing the increased risks posed by the size and design of modern SUV trucks. It highlights the importance of accounting for external safety features, not just internal, especially for vulnerable road users like pedestrians, bike riders, nice people. So, um, one of the things that you and I have touched on, Nick, is that, big trucks, like that is so American, like fly your flag on the end. Like, that is a uniquely American thing. Americans love their vehicles when they are loud and proud and big and take up a lot of space on the road.
Yeah,
So,
I am
yeah.
curious. Like, I'm kind of sad that Barry's not here to talk about it from an international perspective, but maybe I see him in chat. So maybe Barry, if you have thoughts on big trucks and want to let us know about pedestrian safety, please chime in. But this is interesting because it's the rule specifically that they're calling for here is looking at all passenger vehicles weighing 10,000 pounds or less, but aimed largely at SUVs and pickups. And it's looking at sort of testing and performance requirements to minimize those risks of pedestrian industries or injuries. And so basically when you limit it in that way, or the way that these I guess these rules for testing and performance are going to be implemented, it's specifically targeted at the trucks because cars would be in there too. But I think there's a lot of interesting things that happen with cars that don't necessarily happen with trucks, and we're talking about specifically those hood heights. Um, you can imagine some very different gruesome scenarios that would happen if you have a hood height that's as tall as a pedestrian versus a hood height that is, at a pedestrian's waist in a
Mhm.
car.
Mhm.
And so I think that is why they're calling specific attention to some of the pedestrian heights. And I do know that there are large differences in the type of trucks that are out there. You said big trucks are a uniquely American thing, and then there's the opposite side of things, which like you have the small trucks in Japan, and a lot of people have been importing those, and there's been a lot of sort of talk about what do you actually get with a big truck, because the if you look at the
Mhm.
bed size in these trucks, the big ones versus the small ones is comparable in a lot of cases. Like, what do you need that much space for? And I think some of the arguments come down to horsepower. I am not a
Mhm.
big truck owner. But I can imagine that there's a lot of people who would be upset by some of these rules in place that would change the way trucks look and feel, maybe. But
Mhm.
ultimately, it's in the guise of safety. So I'm
Mhm.
I'm kind of all for it.
Oh, yeah, I agree. I I think it's interesting, like I think about, my own experiences growing up in a small rural community, right? Everybody had trucks and like the big ones, like the F-250s, F-350s. But those trucks had purpose. They were pulling equipment behind them. They were out on farms. They were pulling horses. And then, you also have a huge section the of the population, that's pulling campers and RVs and, using it for more recreational purposes um, rather than,
Utility.
occupational purposes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then that leaves the last section of the population that just likes to have a big truck. So that's a why question for me. Like I can understand having a larger vehicle for one of those other reasons, but if you just like to have a big truck, like why? And that's where the safety piece comes into play, because if you want to drive a large vehicle, are you also taking into consideration all of those external factors for what happens if you're in an accident, you know?
Yeah, there's some interesting and sad statistics here I'm going to read. But the Insurance Institute for Highway Safety said that whatever the nose shape pickups, SUVs, and vans with hood height greater than 40 inches are about 45% more likely to cause fatalities in pedestrian crashes than cars and other
Mhm.
vehicles with a hood height of 30 inches or less. So really looking at that hood height here in this statistics. And then so you'll notice that there's about 10 inches between those two statistics, between 30 and 40 inches. Um, and and it's really in that range where you're looking between 30 and 40 inches that a blunt or more vertical front end is reducing the risk to pedestrians. And
Mhm.
so if it seems like if you have something that's greater than 40 inches of a hood height, then you might need to I don't know if it necessarily make a difference, but it seems like that critical range is between 30 and 40 inches. And so will this transform the way that US trucks look? Because like I mean, I'm sure you've seen that Japanese truck, that small Japanese truck that has the like front flat
Mhm.
forward, and I wonder if we have something similar here in the States, we start to see these big trucks, but just with a flat front that sort of reduce some of the risk to pedestrians. And I mean, i- it's in some ways about marketing, right? You got to make it look cool, and
Mhm.
I think there's a way to do that, and to be safe about it. And I am just curious about sort of what this actually means for the industry because I don't
It's
know.
it's gonna be really interesting. I mean, especially if you consider the structure determines function ideology, you know, what what does this do in terms of the um, various industries that use trucks for, the important purposes. Well, truly like farming and transportation of really heavy, difficult equipment. Because if you change the engine, you change its capability to do the job that it needs to do. But then it begs the question, do you need to have a truck that is that big? Also, I want to be able to pull out of a driveway and be able to see to see. And
Yeah.
if there is a truck, I live in the city. So like if there's a truck like parked at the end of my driveway with its nose close to my driveway, I cannot see past it when I'm pulling out.
Yeah.
That's
I mean,
scary.
yeah, and I do wonder, you bring up some the form defining function, and I wonder if some of these rules will impact other things like performance when it comes to these vehicles. You can imagine there's likely some fuel consumption differences that happen between the shape of the hood and the shape of the front of the truck. There's likely some
Mhm.
driver safety things that will be impacted too. If the drivers, the front of a car has largely been seen as sort of a crumple zone. And so if they crash
Right.
into something, then there's a buffer there between the driver and the object that they have crashed into. And if you are now needing to put the driver up closer to the front, like I'm imagining like the front of a bus, right, is now
Mhm.
what these trucks are
Mhm.
looking like. And if you do that, then there's less safety for the driver, but more safety for the pedestrians. And so it becomes sort of this equation of a trolley problem where you have, do you save the life of the driver or do you save the life of the pedestrians on the street? And
Mhm.
it's impossible to kind of
Mhm.
calculate these things because it's possible that the driver's not at fault in most of the cases where they would be impacted from the front. Um, if they have a head-on collision with somebody who wasn't paying attention, that's not their fault. But you can
Mhm.
also see where if there's a pedestrian accident, that the driver is probably more likely to be at fault for something like that. And so what is the true trade-off here between I'm sure there's probably some compromise. You could have like, just a large front that extends out a little bit to serve as a crumple zone, but then you have a high up seat so that way they're not really impacted by anything. I think there's ways around it, but it
Mhm.
will significantly transform the industry for sure.
Mhm. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see where this goes. There are so many different risk assessments to do in so many different directions. It's just going to be really interesting to see how this affects both the car industry, but then the domino effect that it'll have elsewhere for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's move on to our next story. This one's cool. What do we have next?
This is super cool. So Hilton has partnered with the app Be My Eyes. So Be My Eyes is this partnership is designed to improve the hotel accessibility for blind and low vision guests. This collaboration is designed to enhance the guest experience through better navigation and interaction with hotel services. So cool. Way more inclusive than just flashing, like the flashing light on the doorbell of a hotel room. I mean, what a level of just upping the game for our friends who need this level of support. This is just awesome. I
You
love it.
know, I have to admit that I was initially very critical of this because my first thought was, geez, are they just outsourcing their accessibility to this app?
Mhm.
Are they just giving are they just waving away accessibility and saying, yeah, here you can use Be My Eyes within the Hilton app?
Mhm.
And I was glad to see that the answer to that was no. The answer to that is that they're using it as a way to integrate with their own app. And the concept here is that they're actually talking to a Hilton employee through the Be My Eyes app, through
Mhm.
the Hilton phone, or through the Hilton phone app. And so it connects you directly with a staff member who is familiar with Hilton facilities, is familiar with how things are. And so that's really cool. And there's a video, you all can go watch it. It's on the news article that we'll put in the description of this episode from Engadget. But there's a really cool video that walks through this guy's experience. He's a business person and he travels a lot for work, but he's vision impaired. He's like fully
Mhm.
blind. And so he was walking through some of the use cases that he might use this for, and for a lack of a better phrase, it was really eye-opening, to just, I mean, get a perspective on how many of these things that you take for granted with
Mhm,
vision, right? And so,
mhm,
so I'll walk through some of these use cases, but just, the difference between a shampoo, conditioner, and body wash bottles in the bathroom, and he's, asking which one is which, so that way I know when I take a shower which one do I reach for. Um,
mhm,
Finding outlets to charge your devices, adjusting a thermostat because you can't tell what it's at, finding a vending machine on the facility, finding a gym or amenities within the facility, picking out clothes. Like he actually, brought out his suitcase, and he got the app, and he said, "Is this my brown shoes?" And he's, "Nope, these are my black shoes." And then, okay, great, and he looked for his, and then even ordering from a menu, you can imagine all these things. There's likely apps, or even Be My Eyes itself um, would be a good service for this. And I don't know if anyone has ever used this, but it's a really cool service that traditionally connects you to someone else who is
mhm,
volunteering.
mhm,
The concept here, I should have done this at the start, but the concept here is that you open up your phone, you open up the app, and it will connect you to an individual, a sighted individual, who is able to use your phone on your device as you look around, and they'll be able to describe what's around you. Like, oh, I need help finding my medicine. Where is
mhm,
it? And they use the phone, and they say, oh, it's to your left. Okay, great. And then you're helping somebody who's vision impaired navigate through the world.
mhm,
And so that's why I was critical of this. Is, are they outsourcing this? But no, one, they connect you to the Hilton person, and because of a lot of these like on-site things, I think that's going to be the difference, because now they can pull up a map on their end, and it sounds like there might be dedicated staff to do this. They can actually bring that stuff up on their end and say, hey, go down the hallway, and once you feel an opening, that's going to be your left, and then your gym's going to be right there. So like, I think
mhm,
this is so
mhm.
cool. What are your thoughts on it?
I love anything that can open up the world in a way that is safe and guided for those who need extra support in doing so. Um, I I think there are a few assumptions that occur when um, when you do see someone who is, for instance, vision impaired, and it's that they have everything that they need to navigate their space, whether it's a cane, or they have a guide dog, or maybe they've labeled things in braille, or they've put things on it like various clips in order to understand. But the reality is number one, you don't know where someone is in their journey of vision impairment. There are a lot of people that become vision impaired in adulthood. They didn't grow up learning how to read braille. Those are and that is hard to learn how to do when you're already past like your learning phase as a grown up. So to be able to provide multiple forms of access to support for just basic living needs to navigate a space, well, whether you're there for work or whether you're there with your family for a vacation. I mean, that's just that is kind, and it is loving, and it says we welcome you regardless of who you are and where you come from and where you are in your station of life. And I just love that.
Yeah, there's a few other use cases that I didn't mention, but even finding the entrance to the hotel, finding the elevators within the hotel, finding your specific room in the hotel. And if you're with somebody, those things are fairly trivial because you have somebody there in your vicinity who can walk you through and do all that. But this is truly just for the person. It it empowers these vision impaired people to actually do all this stuff themselves, or
Mhm,
with assistance by themselves, which can be it you really don't understand how dependent on others you are in a lot of cases for some of these impairments. And it it has to be really freeing from their perspective to be able to do this on their own,
Mhm. Mhm.
with, and I mean, to be fair, the promotional videos put together by Hilton, and there's probably like a lot of rosy language being used, and it's
Mhm.
probably like the ideal scenario, but I can't imagine a world where this is not a positive addition to having this ability to do this. Like, I think
Mhm.
it sounds like a true partnership, and even in some cases there's like an AI language model that uses GPT to
Mhm.
or GPT-4 to look at sort of the things around you, and they did a demo of that. But it sounds like it's not just let's rely on AI to do this thing. They are truly connecting you with another human that is, going to walk you through the stuff. And so I think, and having it built into the app itself is just awesome.
That's really cool. Also, it is hard enough sometimes to find your way around a hotel, being able to have
Being
like full
cited.
vision. Yeah, like I keep thinking about, okay, are they rolling this out in Europe? Because I've been to some European hotels that are like, I mean, a labyrinth to get through. So to be able to have someone directly guide you who is intimately familiar with that property, oh my gosh, that's amazing.
Yeah, it says, just for awareness, the partnership covers brands including Waldorf, Astoria, Conrad, DoubleTree by Hilton, and Hampton by Hilton, through though only in the U.S. and Canada for right now. So
Well,
so
let's make
no,
sure that that pilot gets used immensely here in the US because that would have a huge benefit elsewhere
yeah,
and here. But yeah, that's a
absolutely.
big win. I love it.
Okay, you want to talk about the toddler arms? Let's talk about the toddler arms.
I'm so excited about this one. Okay, so SpaceX, they had another win. They successfully it's SpaceX successfully catches the super heavy booster after launching Starship's fifth flight. So we're calling it the toddler arms because it was cracking us up to watch the video. SpaceX Super Heavy booster successfully returned to the pad after liftoff to be caught by the launch tower's mechanical arms in an incredible feat on Sunday morning. And if you happen to watch it, you didn't happen to see it, you need to go watch a video. It's the coolest thing ever. The milestone came during the fifth flight of the company's Starship and is a huge step for the rocket's planned reusability. And I think this is one of the coolest things that SpaceX has figured out. It's the reusability of their ships and boosters. Like, are you for real? And also, when it landed, it did. It looked like a toddler in the backyard trying to catch a balloon with their arms straight out in front, their fingers locked. We've all seen it. It's hilarious. Um, but yeah, I mean,
A huge
so
huge feat of engineering. Barry is not here with us today because he's not feeling too well. But he does say seeing SpaceX catching the booster was awesome. I'll agree. Like, this is, if you haven't
yes.
seen the video, go see the video. It is a true feat of engineering marvel to watch this thing. You're like, how is it? How are they doing all this? It literally does look like toddler arms coming out to catch this rocket that's coming in, and it truly is sort of this magnificent moment in human achievement. And why are we talking about this? Because it's a lot of automation.
Mhm.
Well, as promised last week, we started posting these stories in our Discord. So if you're not on our Discord, please come join us. We can chat about these stories. One person who did comment on this on our Discord was Vianney, and she brought up the issue of safety. So, like, what if this thing falls? And you have to imagine that there's a lot of human factors engineering that goes into this process, with not just the automation piece, but the safety protocols going on behind the scenes. How do you clear the space, make sure no one's around that area when this thing is attempting to be caught, make sure that the crew and the systems execute these launch and landing sequences appropriately. There's likely some human monitoring going on involved, and when do you jump in and help it do all these things. It seems largely automated, and it probably is automated in most cases, but you have to imagine there can be some human intervention when it makes sense to do so. And so when you have this sort of automation, for these remote operations. It can minimize human error when you have systems that talk to each other and sort of self-regulate, especially when it comes to catching these large SpaceX booster rockets. Like,
With chopsticks.
it's probably really hard for a human operator to do that, right? Like, imagine sitting at a control going, pulling in the joysticks to try to catch this thing as it comes in. Probably not something that humans can do, without a lot of error involved. And so you have these automated processes, but when it comes to humans, what does that recovery look like? How do you establish the processes for actually going up to that thing and taking the booster off of those chopsticks and putting it, back on the floor and linking it back up? And there's a lot of human elements that are not talked about because this
Mhm.
main story is all about the automation. I just it's super cool to me that there's so many different parts and pieces where when you just look at the automation, cool, but there's a lot of stuff that isn't necessarily immediately apparent when you do just look at this feat of engineering and automation.
Yeah, for sure. And it definitely it opens the door to all of the questions of what's next. How does this translate into other aeronautic efforts that are going to be occurring? Like watching that booster, I immediately thought of like all of the Star Wars movies and the way that all of the jets would take off and then they land, and there's no I don't, they just do. That's what that looked like. That's what, like, it looks it doesn't look real.
It's futuristic.
I know. I know. It's the kind of thing, again, like going back to being a kid, it's the kind of thing I would watch in a movie and you're like, "Oh my gosh, that's so cool." Maybe in the year 2020, because that seemed so far away. It it's
And
just
instead we got a pandemic.
oh my god.
Yeah. I think there's a quote here. The move risked destroying the tower if Super Heavy
Yeah.
didn't pull it off correctly. And that, I think, you think about the safety involved with that. There's a ton of safety protocols that go on with planned demolition of large structures like buildings. You can,
Mhm.
with all the safety, you got to get a crowd cleared out of the way for all the debris so that way it doesn't hit you. And I imagine they had all those safety protocols in place as well here, just in case something didn't go to plan. Um, and I just, like, there's mad respect for the people who have thought about all that stuff and like, how could this potentially go wrong? Because this could have gone wrong in a lot of
A lot
ways.
of ways.
uh you imagine that booster tilts on its side and fires off the rocket, and it's a missile at that point, so it's not a rocket, and I'm very thankful that it didn't go wrong. And it's just,
Mhm.
take a minute to marvel at human engineering.
It it's legitimately fascinating. There are some really, really smart people on this earth that are just it's just a wonder. It is just a wonder. What an amazing time to be alive, truly. I mean, we are part of one of the most unique generations that has seen the shift in technological marvel. Um, and we're just getting started. I mean, the exponential growth that is going to be happening just even over the course of the next 10 years, we can't even imagine it. It's just phenomenal.
Yeah, you're right. All right. Well, I think that's all for the news stories today. Thank you to all of our friends over at AP News, the Federal Trade Commission, Engadget, for all of our news stories this week. If you want to follow along, we do post the links to all the original articles on our weekly roundups in our blog and in our Discord. You can chat us up there for more discussion on these articles, these stories, and much more. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back to see what's going on in the human factors community right after this. Tired of boring lectures and textbooks on human factors and UX? Well, grab your headphones and get ready for a wild ride with the Human Factors Minute podcast. Each minute is like a mini crash course packed with valuable insights and information on various organizations, conferences, usability methods, theories, models,
certifications, tools, and much more. We'll take you on a journey through the fascinating world of human factors, from the ancient history to the latest trends and developments. Listen in as we explore the field and discover new ways to enhance the user experience. From the Think Aloud protocol to the critical incident technique, focus groups, iterative design, we'll make sure that you're the smartest person in the room. Tune in on the 10th, the 20th, and the last day of every month for a new and interesting tidbit related to human factors. Don't miss out on the Human Factors Minute podcast, your ultimate source for all things human factors.
Human Factors Cast brings you the best in human factors news, interviews, conference coverage, and overall fun conversations into each and every episode we produce. But we can't do it without you. The Human Factors Cast network is 100% listener supported. All the funds that go into running the show come from our listeners. Our patrons are our priority, and we want to ensure we're giving back to you for supporting us. Pledges start at just $1 per month and include rewards like access to our monthly Q&As with the hosts, personalized professional reviews, and access to the full library of Human Factors Minute, a weekly podcast where the hosts break down unique, obscure, and interesting human factors topics in just 1 minute. Patreon rewards are always evolving, so stop by patreon.com/humanfactorscast to see what support level may be right for you. Thank you, and remember, it depends.
Yes, as always, huge thank you to all of our patrons. You literally keep the lights on over here, and I don't say it enough, but your financial support really, truly does make this thing possible. And this is the only time during the show where I get to beg for your money. So if you want to see us do bigger and better things at next year's HFES Aspire, or heck, even some other conferences going on, there's a Patreon. You can support us if you're financially able to and want to support us that way. We try our very best to give back to you for doing so. All right. With that said, let's move into a part of the show that we have not necessarily touched on in a while, but back by popular request.
It came from
Popular request and years of having that stupid graphic that I still haven't done anything with. It came from, yes, this is the part of the show where we search all over the internet to bring you things that the human factors community is talking about. So we have 3 up tonight, and we've actually started reaching out. We started looking at LinkedIn to see what folks in our profession are talking about. This first one up here is from Jeremy Schwark, who is the human factors lead at Google. And the sort of premise of this post was, do you need a PhD to do research? So I'm going to read his full post here. We can go through our comments. It's sad to see an influential UX pioneer suggest that researchers might be better off without a PhD, so one can, quote, focus on useful and fast research, end quote. Is a PhD required for research? No. Should you get a PhD if you want an industry research job? For the vast majority of people, no. There are a lot of reasons not to get a PhD, and he goes into some of those. But the idea that getting a PhD inhibits you from doing useful or fast research is, in my opinion, nonsense. There's a little bit more to the post, but I want to kind of talk about this premise here. Meghan, you have some thoughts here about PhDs. You mentioned in the pre-show that your family is of PhDs. What are you thinking about this? Do you need a PhD to conduct research?
Nope. Not in the least.
Great. Next question. No.
Yep. Yeah.
Here to elaborate.
Yeah, of course. No. So no, absolutely not. Here's where the PhD component is valuable. Number one, there's history behind it. Number two, you are doing highly focused research that nobody else has done. You have the tiniest slice of the tiniest slice of pie to make your mark and ensure that the work that you're going to be doing creates a space for someone else to step upon and do further work. There's value in that. There's also the math and the way that you learn to ask questions and the validity behind the work that you're doing. What's really important, though, in all of this is all of these things are taught. Okay, so you can teach those things to someone in in sequence, but you can teach them also in isolation, and it doesn't require 3 years of coursework and a full year of writing a dissertation in order to do that. Much of those things can be learned in a working environment. So I real the piece about um lots of reasons not to get a PhD. I mean, that really resonates. I myself, I was literally to the point I just had about a class left and I dropped out of getting my PhD. My quality of life was suffering. I had a newborn at that point. I could not I couldn't manage all of the things. And then the thought of knowing that it was going to take me a solid year to then sit down and dedicate, you know, a significant amount of time every single week that was just to writing and evaluating all of the research that I was doing. It wasn't possible, especially because I was also working full time. So the balance with all of it, it's not possible. Now, if you think about the flip side where you are able to integrate the learning and the skill set to do valid research, to get information out of it, to promote your whatever it is you're working on, whether it's a product or a medicine or even just a process that you're using, um, y- you can do that well, and you can do it with a group of people, as long as it's repeatable and as long as you have valid metrics that you can rely on and support with evidence. You're in really good shape.
Yeah, I think the one of the premises of his argument here is that researchers specifically in industry need to learn constraints, and those constraints are learned from PhD approach.
Mhm.
And basically, the argument is that when you get a PhD, you sort of understand how to look at those constraints and dial back. And, one of the comments here on this post by Trevor, he actually says, to put it succinctly, you need to learn the rules before you can break them. Beyond analytical thinking skills, a PhD gives you the know how of which rules you can soften and to which degree while maintaining rigor. And while
Mhm.
agree that in most cases, yeah, PhD will give you that, but I think at a master's level, you get that too. And to me, the argument is not necessarily master's or PhD, but rather higher education, or democratize research in such a way that some folks can come up from the ranks and do it. And
Mhm.
about I- I've talked many times about the democratization of UX research. Um, in such a way that allows people to contribute without um, being gatekeepy in such a way that that prevents those people from learning, that prevents those people from taking the next step to understand what some of those constraints are, right?
Mhm.
When I approach something, I'll kind of say, here's what we need to do to give it that science approach to make sure that our
Mhm. Mhm.
to make sure that our data is sound, to make sure that everything's in its place where it needs to be. But then I'll often include others and explain why we came to certain decisions about that process.
Mhm.
Frank in the chat says there is a difference too in being in the business of creating research versus the
Mhm.
business of applying research, and that's absolutely true. Um,
Absolutely.
you think about academia, you're pushing the boundaries on something very small and specific, and you have a good idea of what comes next. And then in industry, you are trying your best to apply um, academic research or certain methodologies to your process. And in most cases, well, not, I won't say in most cases, in many cases, those processes will break down because of certain conditions about what it is that you're looking at, whether it's access to
Mhm.
the end users, or not being able to gather data in a way that you would traditionally gather data in, and sort of having all of this, all these constraints. You are forced to modify your methodology to accommodate those constraints, and it's how you approach the study of UX research in such a way that still allows for it to be sound research without these constraints impacting the validity of your study.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, when you're looking at research in academia, you're really considering so much of the ideal situation. And what Frank said, really, yeah, it's one. There's a difference between doing the research and applying it. I just this is such an interesting topic to me. Literally, I mean, like my mom and my sister and my brother-in-law all have PhDs. And they're all very smart. We also every single person in our family has a master's degree. And there were, there were times even, when working on your master's and you're doing the research and you're doing all of the same things, just on a smaller scale, but that doesn't mean you can't apply it. Frank said, he added another comment. He said, there's also the business of training researchers and creating new research, training researchers, applying the research. That's, yeah. I mean, you've got the research kind of originating and the methodologies originating in academia, but the whole point of doing any kind of experiment, so your research, is that it's duplicatable. It doesn't have any validity if you can't transport it somewhere else. So, the question is, does the same thing apply to research itself? If you're doing what you're doing in academia, but you're doing it in a business setting and your restraints are now different, are you able to, Frank,
Frank's on a roll. He's just
making me
continuously
dizzy with
commenting.
your comment.
I'll read this next one. Applying research,
yeah.
probably some opportunity cost to learn other non-PhD skills or getting practical work experience.
I mean, you're not wrong, Frank. There's an element to personal intercommunication skills that need to occur outside of academia as well, that are going to look different in a business setting or a commercialized setting than they are going to look in a lab. Plain and simple.
I'll kind of end it with this one. There's a comment by Joel Barr on this post.
Mm-hmm.
Says, I feel like we do this debate once a year. The last time we had it, nothing was resolved and no one switched their side of the fence. My wager is that this will turn out to similarly with the Pioneer. Yeah, I saw. And then Jeremy responds to it. Yeah, I saw that research democratization is back on the menu. Life is a simulation. Nothing is real. Joel says, it's nice to be back to normal. No? So
Nice.
yes, this is a continuous topic that always pops up in the field, and one that I think we're no closer to answering now after talking about it for a few minutes than we were 5 minutes ago, 10 minutes ago, whenever we started talking about this. We had a couple of other it came froms, but this one sparked such good discussion with you all watching at home and us here. So we're going to cut the other two. Maybe we'll get to them next week. But now it's time for us to talk about one more thing. And there's no intro or no fun visual for this one. So it's just one more thing. Megan, what you got up this week?
Okay, so I live a very intentional life, in the sense that I wake up every day and I look for things to be grateful for. I keep a journal and I write 3 things down every day that I'm grateful for. It's next to my bed and I write it every night before I go to sleep. It's really, really an important part of how I operate. But in particular, this week, there were some difficult things happening with my family. My family is absolutely critical to my livelihood. I have 2 amazing kids, but I also have a large family. We all live near one another. And there were hard things. And I really had this moment where I woke up the other day and I just was like, oh my gosh, this day is going to be hard. But I made a really specific effort to shift my mindset right in that point to choose joy. So not this day is going to be really hard, but where can I find joy today? And it was something that I really wanted to share, especially because one of the things that was really, really interesting was my daughter, who did who is 18. She turned 18 yesterday, but we had her birthday cake in a hospital room because my mom was in the hospital. So like having that juxtaposition of like celebration of life, but also kind of the reality of life in that same moment, it was the most interesting experience I think I've just about ever had as it relates to choosing joy, choosing presence, choosing how to operate in a way that is intentional so that when you are present with people, they truly feel it. So, just something I really wanted to share. I think it's important. The other thing was, oh my gosh, it's almost time to vote, and I'm so excited. And one of the coolest things I think I've ever seen is watching my daughter and her friends talk about voting and how they all worked together to ensure, like in Michigan, when you are 16 and a half, if you did not know this, spread the word. When you are 16 and a half, you can pre-register to vote so that when you turn 18, you're automatically registered. So she can just go to the polls, and she and her friends have made a plan already for voting. And I love that. They're going to go pre-vote, or they're doing early voting. They're going together. Like, that is the coolest,
so cool.
coolest thing. Like, if there's any effort or any like growth into adulting that I am most proud of about her, it's that, and that she like did it on her own. So that is just, it's really neat to watch your kids turn into their own little people.
It's very cool.
Mhm.
I have two things on here, and I usually kind of pick depending on how the conversation goes. But since you brought up voting, I'm going to bring up
Mhm.
this. So, longtime listeners, watchers, viewers of the show know that I am a junkie when it comes to politics, and when it comes to like Barry and I had a whole stream when the UK politics were going on. And stay tuned, we might do something for the US elections here in a couple of weeks, but TBD. We'll see. But leading up to elections, there are a ton of different websites and a ton of different institutions that are doing various analyses on early voting, and a lot of these break down to sort of, who's voting, where are they voting, what counties are returning, and all these things are very interesting to me because I think we're all invested in politics in some way, or we should be, and
Mhm.
having a certain outcome happen is of interest. And so when you are starting to see where people are starting to return their ballots, and what that demographic is, it makes it makes it very cool. And so there's like like 6 or 7 different dashboards that I'm using to understand that data as it's coming in, and as we're finding out more about who's voting and where they're voting and what counties. And it just it excites me because a couple of years ago we we went out to a cabin in the middle of the woods for my wife's birthday, and it was on election night, and I was like trying to get the like faintest signal going. Oh God, what are the results, what are the results? And it's just like, because you get up to that point, and it's like, we're here, and everything's coming in, and I'm so excited. A lot of people are nervous. I'm just excited. And I think that's gonna be it for today, everyone. If you like what you hear, let's see here. Where's my outro? I gotta find my outro. That's it for today, everyone. If you like this episode, enjoy some of the discussion around, I don't know, what did we talk about today? The click to cancel. I'll encourage you to go listen to some of our other episodes where we talk about similar topics. Comment wherever you're listening with what you think of the stories this week. For more in-depth discussion, like I said, you can always join us on our Discord community. We are now publicly posting stories there, so you can comment on those, which ones you want to hear about, any thoughts you might have. They might end up on the show. Visit our official website, sign up for our newsletter, stay up to date with all the latest Human Factors news. If you like what you hear, you want to support the show, there's a couple things you can do. One, wherever you're at right now, leave us a 5-star review. That is free for you to do, and it really helps other people find the show. Two, this one's really impactful. Tell your friends about us. That is the word of mouth is the biggest way that we grow. And three, if you have the financial means to, you want to support us on Patreon, that is something you can do as well. We always appreciate that. As always, links to all of our socials and our website are in the description of this episode. I want to thank Meghan Michaels for being on the show today, filling in for Barry Kirby. Where can our listeners go and find you if they want to talk about toddler arms, chopsticks, catching SpaceX rockets?
You can find me on LinkedIn, but be careful. You may go down some rabbit holes of a video series that I made last spring called Build With Me. But enjoy.
Excellent. As for me, I've been your host, Nick Roome. You can find me on Discord and across social media at Nick_Roome. Thanks again for tuning in to Human Factors Cast. Until next time.
It all
It
depends.
depends.
It depends.